Man, let me tell y'all something. I thought I had seen some things in my life. I done hosted game shows, met presidents, talked to millionaires, been broke, been rich, been back broke again, but nothing confused me, humbled me, and straight up messed with my head the way this right here did. Because I was sitting there one day minding my business and somebody said, Tony Robbins, have you ever looked at the scientific things in the Quran? And I said, the what and the what? Because look, man, I ain't no scientist. I barely pass math. I still don't know why letters in the alphabet got mixed up with numbers that still don't make no sense to me. But when I heard people saying the Quran had scientific facts written down 1,400 years ago, before microscopes, before telescopes, before NASA, before Google, before a dude could just lie on the internet and call it research, I said, hold on now, let me check this out for myself. Because I don't just believe things because people say them. I don't care if you got a suit on, a degree, a beard, a laboratory, you got to show me. And brother, when I started looking into this thing, man, I started sitting back in my chair like somebody just turned the lights on in a room I didn't even know I was standing in. I'm talking about the first thing I read was that the Quran said the universe is expanding. Now, if you don't understand how big that is, let me give you some context. The idea that the universe is expanding, that everything in space is moving away from everything else, that didn't get proven until a man named Edwin Hubble in the 1,920 seconds. That's barely 100 years ago. Before that, people thought space was just there. Still like a big blanket somebody hung up in the sky. But the Quran, a book that came in the 600s said, and the heaven we constructed with strength, and indeed we are expanding it. Man, I read that and I said, wait a minute, who told Muhammad that? Because NASA ain't even existed for 1,300 more years. You mean to tell me a man in the desert with no satellites, no space station, no telescope bigger than a dinner plate, he just guessed that the universe was expanding? That ain't no lucky guess. That's like somebody in 5th century Arabia predicting the iPhone, FaceTime, Wi-Fi, and TikTok dances. Don't play with me. That's when I leaned in because I was like, hold on. Either this man was the greatest scientist that ever lived or he didn't write that book by himself. So now I'm curious. I'm thinking maybe that was just one verse, one coincidence. Maybe I'm tripping. But then I start finding out the Quran talked about mountains, not just as big rocks, but as stabilizers for the earth. Now look, y'all, when I see a mountain, I just see a big old pile of dirt with attitude. I ain't thinking about nothing scientific. But geologists today say mountains have deep roots like pegs, and they help stabilize the earth's crust from shaking. The Quran said that 1,400 years ago, and the mountains as pegs. Man, how in the world do you know that when you ain't never drilled into a mountain, when you don't even have a shovel made of steel? I'm talking 600 folks were still making spoons out of wood and rocks. Ain't nobody conducting geological surveys, but that book said it. Anyway, then I come across the embryology stuff. Oh boy. I said, now wait just a minute. Because the Quran describes the baby forming inside the womb in stages like a clot, then bones, then flesh covering the bones. And that right there, that wasn't known until we got microscopes powerful enough to see inside the womb. That was the 20th century. Modern doctors said, yeah, that's correct. That's the order. You got textbooks today that match what the Quran said. But this was written at a time when the only knowledge people had about pregnancy was woman's stomach get big, baby come out. That's it. No ultrasounds, no 3D scans, no gender reveal balloons, popping confetti in the backyard. And yet the book says it in detail. And I'm sitting there rubbing my forehead thinking, okay, Tony Robbins, now you got two choices. Either the world's smartest scientists were all late to the party, or this book came from somebody who already knew everything. And I don't care how smart you think a man is, he don't just guess astronomy, geology, oceanography, embryology, physics, and get it all right. That ain't coincidence. That's design. But the one that really shocked me, and I mean, I had to stand up and walk around the room, was the thing about the two C's. The Quran says there are two bodies of water that meet, but they don't mix. There's a barrier between them. Now, when I heard that, I laughed. I said, bro, water is water. Pour 2 glasses into one bowl, it mixes. Ain't no barrier. Then I learned from modern oceanography that where salt water and fresh water meet, there's a barrier called a Holocene. They touch, but they don't mix. Different density, different temperature, different composition. It looks like they're meeting, but they stay separate. And the Quran said he released the two seas meeting side by side. Between them is a barrier. They do not transgress. Brother, I sat back like somebody hit me with a mental frying pan. How does a man in the desert know what's happening underwater at the bottom of the ocean where no human even went until submarines were invented? That ain't guessing. That ain't estimating. That's information. And now I'm just looking around like, okay, now somebody got to explain this to me. Because if this was written by some man who couldn't read or write, living in the 7th century, surrounded by sand, camels, and dates, and he somehow knew things, scientists just figured out after microscopes, satellites, submarines, and PhDs that somebody bigger than a human being is talking in that book. So now I'm sitting there with all this information in my head and I'm looking around the room like, hold up. Am I the only one just now learning this? Because I haven't been on TV for years. I've talked to pastors, rabbis, atheists, professors, lawyers, rappers. I done been in churches, studios, comedy clubs. Ain't nobody ever told me the Quran had this kind of stuff in it. I'm thinking, man, why is this not on the news? Why ain't this being taught in schools? Why was I 60 years old before I ever heard that a holy book was talking about cosmic expansion and ocean barriers and embryology before the world even had electricity? And that's when I realized something. People don't ignore Islam because they know it. They ignore it because they don't know it. They judge it from the outside. They judge it from headlines. They judge it from what somebody else told them, not from what the book actually says. And I said, man, that's the same way folks judge people too. They see a Muslim with a beard or a hijab and think they know their whole life story. They never sat down and asked one question. That's like watching 5 minutes of my comedy special and then telling people Tony Robbins is not funny. You ain't even giving me a chance yet. So the deeper I go, the more this thing keep hitting me like plot twists in a movie. I find out the Quran talks about the layers of the atmosphere, 7 layers. And modern science confirms that Earth's atmosphere is made up of multiple layers. Troposphere, stratosphere, mesosphere, thermosphere, exosphere, all that. The Quran said, he who created the 7 heavens, one above another. Now, the Arabic word used there doesn't just mean 7 heavens like paradise. It means 7 layers like levels. 1,400 years before aerodynamics, before planes, before man ever said, ladies and gentlemen, we are now cruising at 32,000 feet. Ain't. Nobody in the desert in the 600s is supposed to know about atmospheric levels. Ain't no camel riding man sitting there saying, well, actually there's a mesosphere up there. No, sir. So now I'm getting uncomfortable because I'm running into too much accuracy for this to be accidental. Then I learned something that just made me stop everything I was doing. The Quran says that the sun has its own orbit. Now, when I heard that part, I said, wait a minute now, that's got to be wrong. Because we were all taught in school, the earth orbits the sun is still. Then I looked it up and folks, it turns out the sun too is moving. The entire solar system is traveling around the center of the Milky Way. It's moving at 828,000 kilometers an hour. It's orbiting the galaxy. The Quran said, and the sun runs on its fixed course. Now, how does a book from a time when people thought the earth was flat know not only that the sun moves, but that it has a fixed course? Tell me how. Tell me who whispered that into the ear of a shepherd in the desert. I'm listening because if you tell me he figured that out himself, man, I'm going to laugh so hard I might pull a muscle. And y'all, the more I read this thing, the more I realize this ain't a book that was made to impress some tribe 1,400 years ago. This is a book that keeps impressing people today because you can test it now. We got science, we got satellites, we got cameras that can see inside the womb, we got sensors that can go to the bottom of the ocean. And every time we discover something new, the Quran is sitting there like, yeah, already said that. Like it's just watching us play catch up. But let me tell you what really messed me up. See, I'm thinking this book must have been written by a scientist, a genius, somebody with libraries, equipment, scholars. Then I find out the Prophet Muhammad, the man who delivered this book, didn't even read or write. He wasn't schooled. He didn't sit in a science academy. He didn't travel the world studying oceans and stars. He lived in the desert, a place with no telescopes, no microscopes, no universities, a place where people's biggest scientific concern was, do we got enough water to make it home? And yet he recited things nobody on earth knew until centuries later. And now I'm sitting on the couch like, well, somebody explain this to Tony Robbins. Because the only 2 options now are either this man somehow guessed hundreds of scientific facts and got every single one of them correct, or he wasn't guessing. And let me tell you something about guessing. You guess 100 things, you might get one right. He didn't get one. He got all of them. No mistakes, no rewrites, no edits. You show me one scientist who got a perfect score without research, I'll wait. Now, at this point, I'm feeling something I ain't felt in a long time. Humility. Like, man, maybe I ain't as educated as I thought. Maybe all the TV shows and books and speeches and success in the world don't mean nothing if you ain't connected to truth. Because there are people out here following a book I never even read. And I'm just now realizing this thing ain't just religion. It's revelation. It's guidance. It's information from a source outside the world and that made me step back like, okay, maybe everything I thought I knew about Islam was just the surface. Maybe the real story is way deeper than the headlines, the stereotypes, the movies, and the rumors. You ever go your whole life thinking you understand something, then find out you didn't know nothing? That was me, 60 years old, and the Quran made me feel like a student again. And man, let me tell you, that's the best kind of uncomfortable, the kind where your ego gets quiet and your soul starts listening. Now, let me tell you when it really hit me. I was sitting there late at night, lights slow, laptop open, just scrolling through all these different scientific verses people kept mentioning. And I came across something that didn't just surprise me. It stopped me. Like I literally leaned forward, hands on my knees, just staring at the screen like, man, ain't no way. The Quran talks about pain receptors in the skin. Now, listen, that ain't normal ancient knowledge. I'm from the old school generation. We used to think pain was just pain. You get cut, you feel it, that's it. But modern science proved that pain is detected by receptors in the skin. And if the skin is destroyed, you don't feel pain the same way anymore. That wasn't discovered until the 8th, but the Quran said those who reject our signs, we will burn them with fire. Every time their skin is roasted through, we will replace it with new skin so they may feel the punishment. Now, I don't care who you are. You read that and your brain just got to stop for a second because that ain't poetic language. That's biological accuracy. You're telling me a man in the desert 1400 years ago somehow knew that pain is in the skin, not the nerves inside, not the bones, not the muscles, the skin. And you expect me to believe you just figured that out? Man, please. I've hosted Family Feud for years. I've seen people try to guess the simplest answers under pressure. And let me tell you, human guessing ain't that good. That's why the buzzer going off every 5 seconds. Guessing don't get you. Science. Guessing sure don't get you 100% accuracy over 1,400 years. And I'm thinking, okay, Tony Robbins, maybe it's just like 10 verses that sound scientific. Then I find out there's dozens: astronomy, embryology, geology, oceanography, physics, biology, hydrology. And every time I think I reach the last one, another one shows up like, oh, you ain't seen nothing yet. I found out the Quran talks about the barrier in the deep sea where light disappears, saying the depths of the ocean are like layers of darkness, one on top of another. And if a man stretches his hand, he can hardly see it. We didn't even know about that until deep sea submarines and high pressure cameras. It's pitch black down there. No sunlight reaches. Exactly like the verse said. You telling me a man who never even saw the ocean describe what it looked like under it? That's like me describing what's inside a volcano without ever leaving my kitchen. How you explain that? Then I'm sitting there thinking about how the Quran talks about rain. Not just rain falls, not just water comes from the clouds, but explaining evaporation, formation, cycles, storage in the earth. It says rain is sent down in due measure, meaning it's controlled, balanced. That water is stored in the ground and then drawn back out. That rain revives the dead earth. That ain't just religious talk. That's hydrology. The Quran even says there are winds that fertilize the clouds before rain falls. And scientists today call that biological cloud seeding. So now I'm looking at this book like, hold up, this thing wasn't written for ancient people. It was written for all time. Because the deeper science goes, the more this book keeps nodding like, yep, knew that already. Like it's waiting for us to catch up. And what gets me the most, and I mean deeply, is that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, didn't claim to be a scientist. He didn't take credit for any of this knowledge. Every single time he said the same thing. This is revelation from God. He never bragged. He never said, look at what I discovered. He said, I only follow what is revealed to me. You know how rare that is? You know how easy it would have been to take the credit and build a name bigger than anybody, but he didn't. And that tells me two things. One, he wasn't a liar. And two, he knew he wasn't the author. You want to know a sign of truth when somebody doesn't try to own it? When somebody says, this ain't me, that right there is humility. And humility is the fingerprint of something real. So now here I am, this grown man with a nice life, a career, money, fame, influence, and I'm sitting there feeling like the most ignorant person in the room because I'm realizing how much I never knew. And I ain't ashamed to say it, because sometimes the first step to wisdom is admit you've been walking around in the dark. And the more I learned, the more I started asking myself questions like, why don't schools teach this? Why don't churches talk about this? Why isn't this being shown on TV? And then I realized because the truth don't scream, it just sits there quietly waiting for the one who actually wants it. See, the Quran don't need a marketing team. It don't need a PR agency. It don't need a commercial during the Super Bowl. The truth don't beg, it waits. And curious people eventually come to it. And I'll be real with you. At first I was scared because the more truth you learn, the more it starts demanding something from you. You can't just learn about a book that proves itself over and over and then go back to living life like you didn't see nothing. You can't unknow truth. And once you realize a book is really from the creator of the universe, that means you got to start listening to it. And we don't like being told how to live. We think freedom means doing whatever we feel until we realize feelings ain't a compass. They change every 5 minutes. Guidance don't come from opinions. Guidance got to come from the one who made the system. And that's when I realized something real heavy. The reason so many people never discover the truth is because they stop searching once they feel comfortable. Comfort is the enemy of growth. Comfort is where truth goes to die. So now, after all this, I'm sitting there like a student again, asking God to teach me what's real. Because I ain't interested in trends or culture or hype or whatever the world's chasing this week. I want to know what's true, not what makes me feel good, what is good. And I ain't just speaking as a celebrity, as a comedian, or as a talk show host. I'm speaking as a man who realized he spent most of his life hearing opinions about the Quran instead of ever actually reading it. And let me tell you something. When you finally hear the truth firsthand instead of secondhand, it does something to you. You stop saying, how could this be from God? And you start saying, how could it not be? And let me tell y'all something else. Because this part right here had me sitting back like, hold up, this ain't just spiritual. This is mathematical. This is cosmic. This is on a whole nother level. See, a lot of people think the Quran is just a religious book with rules and prayers. But when you actually read it, when you actually listen, it starts saying things human beings had no way of knowing 1,400 years ago, like the development of a baby in the womb, step by step, stage by stage, explained in a book before microscopes even existed. Or the expansion of the universe mentioned centuries before NASA ever launched a rocket. Or the fact that mountains have deep root systems like stakes holding the Earth's crust together, written before geology was a science. Now, somebody got to explain to me how a man in the desert who couldn't read or write knew things scientists only discovered in the last 100 years. See, I've done hosted game shows, comedy shows, and I met some of the smartest people you could put in a room, but none of them ever told me, Tony Robbins, the ocean has 2 bodies of water that meet but never mix because of a barrier of density and salinity. The Quran said that before submarines, before Jacques Cousteau ever put on goggles, and that's the moment where you stop laughing, you stop debating, you stop acting like you got life all figured out, and you just sit there like, okay, somebody knew something, because this ain't about Muslims trying to convert the world. This is about the world finally saying, maybe we should stop acting like we got all the answers and start listening to the one who made the answers. And the craziest part, Muslims weren't even walking around bragging about this stuff. They weren't putting it in TED Talks. They weren't flexing like, yo, we knew about the Big Bang first. Nah, they just said, this is what God said. One day you'll catch up. That's a level of confidence you only have when you know the source can't be debated. So when I say I'm impressed, I ain't talking about being impressed like watching a magic trick. I'm talking the kind of impressed where you start questioning what you thought you knew. The kind that makes you read slower, think deeper, and walk different. Because once you realize revelation and science ain't fighting each other, they're shaking hands.